Loud. Hello, I'm Sally Handley, author of the Holly and Ivy Cozy Mystery Series. I'm very proud to say that book 7 has now been published. The mystery of the Blooming Book Club Murder. Okay, so today we are honored to have not only our moderator, Michelle Chouinard, we also have the author of the book we're discussing, Terry Seamus, with us. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this meeting over to our moderator, Michelle.
Hello. So, as Sally was just saying, today we are going to take a look at the troubling death of Maddie Benson, and remind me later if I don't tell you, if I don't say at the appropriate time, I want to say why I love this title. Why I think this is just a really clever title. Um, and today we actually have Terry Shames with us to talk a little bit about this. So here's how I figured this would go. I'm sure you guys have a ton of questions for Terry, and Terry has a lovely outgoing personality, so she will have no problem answering them. But should there be a little lapse, I've got some questions prepared and some comments prepared to throw in here. But I thought it might be fun to start out because you might not know this, but as authors, we very rarely get to just hear someone tell us what they like about our book. We get lots of bad reviews on, Amazon with people that are angry because their mop broke today, kind of thing. But so I thought I might just have everybody say what their favorite thing about this book was. And I will start just with who's on top on my page, which is Sally.
Well, what I was immediately drawn into this story because the voice and this police person, it was just such a real experience of like, here he gets this phone call and it's a little offbeat, but he just responds to the call, and then all of a sudden they find a body, and it was an amazing journey of how a true investigation takes place. It felt so real, It wasn't, there weren't magic tricks and special effects or, like somebody was brilliant. He just, like did the job, and how it just felt like, wow, and from my experience of talking to police people, like with the Public Safety Writers Association, um, when you talk to a policeman, it's fascinating to realize how much of the work is boring collection of bits of information and the ability to put it together. But also there's always an element of luck where they stumble on something at some point in the investigation that helps them, but they have to be open to recognizing it at the same time. So that was I was just enthralled by the investigation itself.
Good. Can I just make a little comment here?
Of course, absolutely.
One of my favorite reviews I ever got was early on, and it was from Publishers Weekly, and went on something about Samuel Craddock, and then it said, like a good shade tree mechanic, he gets the job done.
There you go.
I love that.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's
exactly.
what you're describing.
Peggy, what did you think? Or Peg, I shouldn't call you, I don't know if you go by Peggy, but Peg.
Well, I'm sorry to say I did not get to read the book. And
Oh,
I
sorry.
talked to Sally and I wanted to come to the meeting today because she thought part of the reason our library didn't carry it. And when I went online to buy it, it was $24.99
Oh, no.
for and I'm sorry, I thought that was a bit much to invest for one session. But
No, one of the things
she thought it was excuse me, she thought it was probably possibly related to something that I'm in Naples, Florida. So Florida has problems with apparently deleting some books from their libraries. So whether that was part of it or not.
Interesting.
I don't know.
Yeah,
But
when I realized that, I thought about it for a moment and I thought, well, maybe because of the topic, this might have been not anything that they were going to carry in their library.
Because
Did you
normally
ask
what
the library if they would get it?
Say
excuse
that
me?
again.
Did you ask the library if they would purchase the book?
No, because I don't know, didn't know anything about the book, so.
Okay.
Oh,
um,
okay. Yeah, because that's actually a good way to help authors that a lot of people don't know about is
Yeah.
that if you ask your library to acquire a book, they're supposed to do it. So that is a great way if you can't afford a particular book or, money's tight that month or whatever, to really help out an author. Because of course, once our book is in the library, then a lot of people can stumble on it. So,
Well,
yeah.
my publisher actually mostly markets to libraries. And so Library Journal gave it a starred review. And so they should know about the book. They may not like the topic. You're right.
Yeah.
I didn't go that far because I was curious, as I said, after talking with Sally, that it had something to do with the subject, so
Yeah.
I wanted
Yeah,
to
and
see.
I think that'll
wanted
make a
to
good
see what-
segue to get into that when we get there. So let's shift over to Darlene and say, what did you like about the book?
I like the pacing. I thought it went along very smoothly. It was a good read. I am curious, and I'll probably ask it later about when you mentioned the actual name of the character who was the murderer and how you went about it. But I liked it.
Let's shift over into Melissa. Oh,
I didn't have a chance to read the book. I haven't even finished the book club book for my in-person book club tonight, so I'm a big slacker. But the description has me very intrigued, especially the idea of like a person who identifies, but then they're mysterious. So I'm just, don't worry about spoiling anything for me because I'm gonna read it anyway. But it's just, and the small town vibe, all that is super intriguing to me. So I'm excited to hear about it.
how about Nancy? Did you have anything you wanted to share? Oh, I think you might be on mute.
We're gonna have to read her lips.
That is a skill I do not possess.
I don't see, oh yeah. I don't see you on mute though. Maybe your microphone's turned down.
Okay.
Yeah, we're not hearing you at all.
We're not.
Yeah. Okay.
Nope. Nope. Maybe I should move on to
Yeah.
asking if anybody has any questions, and then hopefully, Nancy, if you put a question, if you have a question or a comment and you put it in chat, I can read it out. So, does anybody else have something that they would like to ask Terry? Or shall
well,
I? Yes.
I was curious if is the sheriff someone that is he based on someone you know?
You know, the chief of police.
Yeah.
Is based on my grandfather,
Oh.
who was not a cop. He was the mayor of town, and when I was a child, someone came into the backyard of his house. My grandfather only went through the 3rd grade, and he was a self-made man. He was a really interesting guy, and I got along with him exceptionally well. We were great pals. And a man came in and said, "Mr. Sam, I did some work for this woman and she won't pay me." And my grandfather said, "Don't worry, I'll take care of it." And when I was with my mother alone, I said, why did this man come to Popo and ask him that? And she said, he was mayor of the town and people trust him. And so when I was thinking about a character, I thought, well, I want a character that's trusted, but I did not want to write an amateur. I decided in the first books, he is not a chief of police. He is an ex-chief of police. He's had a long career as a landman. I don't know if anybody's watched that series on TV, but it was fascinating to me. to see the kind of things that Samuel would have done through his career. But he comes back, he retires. His wife has just died in the first book, and he decides to investigate a murder of a friend of his because the actual chief of police is currently doubles as the town drunk. So, and both of those people are based on people I know. So, yeah. So yes, they're based on actual people, and I felt that my grandfather had a lot of integrity. He had a lot of interesting things to say about things. He had interesting opinions, and yeah, so that's who I based Samuel
You
on.
know, even the way that he handled those teenage boys, the young boys
Mhm.
who were uh, going out on the boat at night. You know, I mean, he just had such an easy way to handle it. And it
Exactly.
was, you know, it was perfect. It was just great. So yeah, and it felt so real that I felt that it had to be based on somebody definitely who was a real person. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
The
Feel like
location.
I feel like I'm on, I write in first person, so I write in the voice of a man. And I feel like when I start writing, I'm perched on his shoulder and going around and seeing things through his eyes. Yeah.
And the location that was where your grandfather lived as well. It's based on that location?
Yes, it is. I actually wrote some short stories when I was in college that were published in little literary magazines, and I based them on a place called Jarrett Creek. So when I decided to write this book, I said, well, why not go to Jarrett Creek? Because that's a place I know, and it's in my blood. It's in my makeup. I know everything about it. I know how the water tastes and how it smells and everything about it. So yeah, I felt like I was really familiar with it, and that's where I wanted it to be based. And it has turned out to be a really good base for these novels. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to just chime in here that Nancy says, I mean, I'm not surprised but she says that she loves your books, especially The Chief. And she also is originally from Texas, so she is delighted to see you, even though her audio
Yes,
is not working.
it's been a long time, but Nancy and I used to see each other at conferences, and I don't know why I don't see you anymore, but yeah.
But yeah, I think those are two things about this book that I really, really loved was in a police procedural, a lot of times police procedurals tend to be set in these really big cities, and you've got, the gangs and the cartels and all these big things, which are real. And but I love the feel of these books, and I love what you were saying about your grandfather has integrity, and I can see that in
Mhm,
Samuel. And his brand of policing is something that I don't experience a lot in books,
mhm.
which I really, really loved because I think no matter what side, like, whatever your stand is on policing and the current state of it, I think we can all agree that being a member of your community and engaging with your community it is really important for being able to police a community.
Yeah.
And the way he did things like with dealing with the boat joyriders, right? Where he sniffs them out, right? And then he comes up with this very gentle but effective way of dealing with the situation that keeps everybody except for the one little brat happy, right? All
Mhm.
the employees, all of the, and then he's got his eye on that one because he knows, okay, you're the one that's going to be a problem. But everybody else, he smooths the situation over by virtue of knowing these people and knowing how to navigate them, which is a skill I wish I had and I do not.
That's-
And
yeah.
nobody had to go to court,
Oh,
right?
That's
Nobody
wow.
had to go to jail. Nobody had to go to court, and he managed to solve the problem.
Mhm, mhm.
yes,
I have,
absolutely.
for some reason, I often have some teenage boys in these books because teenage boys in a small town tend to be bored and they create problems. So yeah, there's always a couple of teenage boys who are kicking around, giving somebody trouble.
That's their phase of development, right? Is they're pushing boundaries and finding their identity, and you got to make mistakes sometimes to do that. And that was what I loved about his solution is for the one who is going to be able to learn, okay, no, this is not the path I want to tread.
Right.
he was able to allow that to happen with
Didn't you
dignity.
love his mother? I loved his mother. She read him the
Oh,
riot act in the
oh my
nicest
gosh.
possible way.
But I'm probably talking a little too much for a host, so let me open up some other questions. Yes, Darlene.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about when you decided to reveal the murder. I thought it was very interesting that you started out with the car,
Mhm.
and that was the only clue that was available. And then you developed it throughout the book, but you really didn't name the murder until much later on, which I thought was really clever the way you
Well,
arranged it. Could you
thank you.
talk a little bit about that?
Okay, it's always a problem for me to talk about the process because my process is I start writing and I have no idea who did it or why. I have
Oh.
no, half the time I don't even know who got killed. I just start writing. And this develops just out of magic, I guess that you would call it. I just have an idea and I keep picking at it and picking at it almost like an investigator would. I keep picking at it and I keep thinking, why would this happen? Who would do that? And I keep writing and I keep writing and I just keep saying to myself, keep writing, it will come to you. And eventually somebody shows up and I think, oh, wait a minute. I remember way back there, this happened. So maybe that's connected to this. And it just starts to, I'll tell you, my last book, the one that I'm just now editing and tearing my hair out over, I had no idea until 70,000 words in who who did it or why. And I was losing my mind. I said, this is ridiculous. And all of a sudden I said, oh my God, I know exactly what happened. And it all just tied together. And I said, how does that happen? And I think it is that I am like an investigator. I I'm looking at things from the outside and I'm seeing things happen and and things are just happening as I go along. And then eventually they start to tie together. And yeah, does that answer your question?
Yes, but it was what, about halfway through when you
Mhm.
named him, or about three quarters? I'm not quite sure.
Well, and one of the things that I love about the fact that, he's named later, but the specter of this guy is
Mhm.
present from almost like definitely in the first act, but like almost one of the really early chapters when you find out that this wife has been having some dalliances, right? So,
Yeah, yeah. I also had fun with the wife being a romance writer who's making a lot of money. Her husband looks down on her because she makes money and he is, I mean, how many of us get aggravated because we hear people say, "Oh, well, yeah, you're just a mystery writer," you know?
yes. I'm lucky that my husband, does not look down on the genre, but yes, we've all had those moments. And I just want to go on record as saying, I know for a fact people that are doing dissertations on Agatha Christie. So, um,
There you go.
Exactly, yeah, yeah.
well, let's, unless, are there any other questions? And please feel free to, because nobody wants to hear my voice
I
more than
can ask
necessary.
about process also and about publishing world or anything like that that you're interested in. I'm happy to talk about any of it. Uh, If you
But if
can't tell.
nobody has any instant questions, I'm going to ask the thing that's going to spark all the discussion, which is let's talk about writing about social justice.
Hmm,
So, one of the things that I loved about this book and that surprised me, I didn't expect it, when I started reading it, because I'll be honest, I didn't read the blurb because it was, my friend Terry Shames' book, I was going to read it no matter what. So I read it, and then suddenly it's about abortion.
yeah.
And one of the things that, I imagine that when you were writing this, it was probably right when the stuff was happening with Roe v. Wade. Um, but what is that like to try to write about something that is really a flashpoint?
Well, all of my books have some element of social justice in them. I wrote a book about dog fighting, which is one of the most horrific things you can write about. But I knew that if I was writing about small town Texas, I had to write about that because it's there. And I just don't believe in stepping away. But when I started to think about whether or not I wanted to write about the demise of Roe versus Wade, I actually talked to my agent and I said, what do you think about this? Because one of my friends said, you might make yourself a target if you write about this. And that didn't scare me. But I thought, what if my publisher says, we don't want a book about this? So I talked to my agent and she said, look, if anybody can do this, you can do it. So I decided to just start working on it. My second book is about the way veterans are treated in this country, but it's a minor part of it. I didn't want to be didactic in this. I wanted it to be a natural thing. And it's really interesting to me because I have a writers group that consists of 3 men and me. And the men always really, I depend on them to tell me if there's anything that doesn't work from a man's point of view. And it's very rarely do they ever mention anything. But one of the men said, I think that when you talk between the preacher and Samuel and they're having that confrontation, I think the preacher is too awful, you have made him into a really bad guy and you need to pull that back. So I did. I worked really hard to make it more even-handed. And one of the reviews I got, one of the reviews I got said, oh, well, all the people who are on the abortionist side are good people and the other people are bad people. And I thought, no, that's not really true. This was someone who had a viewpoint and he didn't like having to read that there were people on both sides. I tried to make it, if not equal, at least understandable. So
I thought you did that masterfully.
thank you. Thank you.
Because I mean, it's almost halfway into the book that we even discover that this was the issue,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
We just know somebody's been killed, and then you first look at the people all around her, and it takes so long to discover, oh, this is what was happening, and you still aren't sure that that's the reason she was killed.
Exactly.
You
Yeah,
know, you
exactly.
still don't know for sure. So I thought I mean, it was a very real situation, but that's not what it was about. That's not what the book was about.
Mhm.
So I really, I thought it was very handled really well.
Good.
So that
Good.
I didn't feel like you were preachy or didactic in any way, shape, or form.
Thank you.
You presented, this is what happens, and this is what women are facing.
Mhm.
You judge it however you choose to, but the murder occurred for this reason, so no, I thought it was masterfully done.
Well, it was a challenge. It's a challenge to write about social issues. It always is. And
Especially if you have a strong feeling about them.
yeah, well, and I do. I have a very strong opinion about it, but I don't think it's my job. I think it's my job as a writer to open up the discussion, not I mean there's some writers who of course start out to be didactic, to start out to teach, to start out to explain, but I think it's much more useful in the mystery genre to explain by exploring the whole thing rather than just starting out with an attitude and maintaining it. Yeah.
Because you
Darlene,
cannot.
I'm
I'm sorry.
sorry. It just looked like Darlene wanted to say something, like
I'll
she was trying
wait.
to break in.
No, go ahead, Sally.
Okay, sorry.
No, go ahead. I've spoken quite a lot. Thank you.
But I enjoy listening to you, whatever. You have a lot to say, which is good. I like the fact that you used the women who are going through this, that they're not just going because, they're in a situation where they really are desperate.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was important for the story.
Mm-hmm.
And that you actually met a woman that had been going through it and what was going on. I think that was very important.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think, I mean, I have a perspective on this. So obviously my perspective may be biased when I say that I think that you did a really great job presenting other perspectives. But I like to consider myself an empathetic person. And not only did you evoke empathy for, this woman that Darlene's talking about, but you evoked a little bit of empathy in me for the other side, for people that have a different perspective on this and why they might have that perspective. And you did something that I really appreciated, especially because I went back and read this the second time in preparation for today, and it really came home for me the second time. But there's one of the subplots is Connor has to go deal with a dog. And there's a woman that comes out and is just like, this dog is rabid, this dog is whatever, I'm going to kick the crap out of this dog. And Connor's really shaken by this, right? And he's like, I just have a hard time even understanding how someone could react that way.
Mhm, mhm,
And for me, that was like this whole issue in a nutshell of
mhm. Oh,
every
interesting. Yeah.
on either side, we are like, how can you react that way? And the other side is like, how can you react that way? And we have to find this place in the middle, and so Connor examining himself and examining, am I in the right profession? Should I be a social worker? Like just taking the moment to think it through, I
Mhm.
thought was a teachable moment.
Oh, that's nice. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I loved Connor's part in this. I got more and more invested in Connor as it went along.
I really loved him. It's so much that I originally confounded him with another character because I wanted him to be all the things for the entire book. But Sally, let me throw it back to you because I know you had another point you wanted to make.
No, it was very much in line with what Darlene said about, uh, you know, you could have someone strongly opposed to the woman who has inserted herself into this helping other people. It's none of her business. It's not her, you could see how a character like that could become a target,
Mhm,
become the person that people don't like. And then you have the religious people who are like, no matter what, they're judging everybody else. But
mhm.
then you have these women, and all of a sudden that becomes real. They're desperate. They're in a horrible situation. They are not the political sides of the argument. They're very real in a very real situation. And that to me is
I'm so glad that came out because that was the whole point for me is
yeah.
to show people in their desperation and also to talk about Maria and her aunt and things that happened with her and to tell about, all of these little side notes. It was important to me to bring them in. Yeah.
Yes, and Nancy observes that she's reading John Grisham's A Time for Mercy, and he does a masterful job of presenting both sides with a character who deliberates having an abortion. So you are in good company, and I think all of us would love to be compared to John Grisham. So
Well, I
thank you.
read that book. I read that book and it was wrenching. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Does anybody else have a comment they want to make on that? Um, Peg, Melissa, I know you haven't read the book, but if I'm sure you have thoughts about the process of writing about something that's very socially, flashpointy. So if Melissa, did
Well,
you want to?
I'll just toss a question to you, Terry, because you mentioned that all of your writing partners are men. And I'm wondering, are there moments when that affects your ability to take their feedback or their ability to give you feedback?
No, not at all. I've been with this group for 30 years, so I know them well. I know what they're, one of them is a nonfiction writer. He writes about sports. One of them is a journalist who writes about all kinds of things. He's writing a science fiction book. And the other one is a man who writes comedy. So they have nothing to do with what I write. And I don't really show them the work until I think it's done. And only once has one of them said, this is not what a man would say. And all of a sudden I realized that all I had to do was flip the conversation around so that a female character was saying it and that he was saying the other thing. And it was just like, it just slotted right in then. It's just, so, yeah, every now and then I'll get that, but no, the fact that it's a man, we actually have recently gotten a woman who's just a wonderful writer. So I'm very excited about her, and she's an astute reader as well. Oddly enough, my most astute reader of all time is the sports writer. He writes best-selling sports books, and one about baseball, one about wrestling, and yet, and when he first came to the group, I said, there's no way this man is going to have any interest in what I write. Totally the opposite. He really plunges in, and he will get the thread of something and he'll say, you know, this part needs to be brought out more, or that's, you know, he's just a wonderful reader. So I guess my cautionary tale is, don't ever think somebody's going to be a bad reader of your work just because they don't write what you write.
Yeah.
Oh, for sure.
And I'm going to throw in now, I'm going to take that moment to say why I love The Troubling Death of Maddie Benson as a title.
Okay.
And maybe this is me being too cute, but back in the day when I was a kid and stuff was going on in Ireland, it was called the Troubles.
Mm-hmm.
So this division between, and in that case, it was two religions. But so calling this The Troubling Death of Maddie Benson felt like a really clever way to bring in this concept of division, which I don't know if you did that on purpose, but from now on, I think you should say you did, even if you didn't. So
I will tell my agent that you really liked her title because she's the title queen. And this last book, the book that I'm working on now, we could not figure out how to title it. I was completely unable to figure out a title. My agent came up with a title and the publisher said, we don't like that title. So the publisher threw out a few. It's hard to title books. But okay, now that we're talking about it, let me just mention about the cover of the book. Okay, it's got saguaro cactus on it and a mountain in the background. So when they sent me the cover, I said, this is a beautiful cover, but number one, this is in Texas and saguaro cactus only grows in the Sonora Desert. So, you know, you can't just have that on the front. And not only that, but this part of Texas, there are no mountains. There are barely any hills. So they said, well, nobody's going to notice about the cactus and we love the cover, so we're keeping it. And I said, okay. And the first person who wrote to me about the book said, well, I love this book, but why do you have saguaro cactus? Because I immediately sent it to my publisher and said, ha, see? Because people in Arizona are very jealous of their saguaro cactus, and I knew they were, but
Oh, that's funny.
you know, the publisher has to be right about the book cover. So yeah.
well, I will tell you, I've had covers that I don't like, and I've had covers that I love, and both of my current covers I love. But luckily, with my A Tour to Die For, there's a crab on there. It was originally a lobster when they made it, and I told them, I was like, we don't really, lobster's kind of an East Coast thing. We're more crab. Thank goodness they listened, because I was braced for the letters that I would get about the lobster on the front of the book.
You're right,
So.
exactly. Well,
Yeah.
you know, I've written 11 books in this series, and probably my least favorite cover is my best-selling book. So why? I have no idea.
Well, this is it. This is why, for the most part, I shut my mouth,
I
because,
know,
like,
really.
I know nothing about covers, and people go to school for graphic design, and I
Mhm.
let them do their thing, and I write the book inside, and
I
we go
know,
from
really,
there.
really. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, you can't argue with it.
So Nancy just said, can you share the sports writer's name, Terry? I have a baseball player in my newly released book, and there might be a sequel. And Terry, maybe if you don't feel comfortable sharing it, maybe you can.
Fine, I don't mind at all. His name is
Oh,
Brad Balukjian, and he wrote a book called oh, what is the first one? The second one is the Six Pack. Just look it up. You know what? I'll look up the way he spells his name and then I'll put it in the chat. How's that?
I
Okay.
can do that for you while you answer the next question,
Brad
or not.
Balu Bal Lukjian. I think that's the way he spells it. If not, it's close. And yes, the first book he wrote was about baseball and it was fabulous. There you go. Wait a minute. There you go. Yes. So next question. Yes.
Yes. Any other questions? Yes, Peg.
Okay, so I've got a couple kind of going back to Darlene's question on your process. If
Mhm.
you actually try and incorporate something meaningful into your stories, like for example, the issue of abortion,
Mhm.
but you sort of say when you start out writing, you don't know where the story is going to go or who's going to do what.
Mhm.
I would think that that would be sort of challenging. That's my first question. My second question is, if you've been with this writing group for 30 years, 30 something years,
Mhm.
how do you handle it? Because my problem with a lot of writing groups is that you spend more time reviewing other people's work than actually doing your own. But if you've been with a group that long, most of you are probably doing your own writing. How much do you share? How often do you meet?
We meet once a month and someone always has something that they want to work on, but I very rarely offer anything because I will tell them in advance that my book is going to be ready to read and that I will turn it over to them and they will have a month to read it and review it. And that will be the only thing we review that month. So I tell them well in advance, but I'll tell you, I learned so much from critiquing other people's work, that I feel like it's totally valuable to do that. I don't have to have the focus be on my own work. Case in point, I was in a Zoom meeting last night. It's not a writers group, but it was one of the men wanted us to look at his query letter that he was sending out. We had the most lively, interesting discussion about what should be in the query letter and what the description of the book should be about. And you just learn something from discussing other people's stuff as well, and from seeing what works and what doesn't work in someone else's work. I think it does anyway. And
Yeah, I agree. I'll chime in that I agree. The exact same thing. I also have learned how to take feedback in those books, not just my own feedback, but watching how other people
Mhm.
do or don't take
Mhm.
feedback, has taught me some lessons about, when, 2 ears, one mouth kind of situation. So yeah, I would agree with you. I think I've gotten a lot more from critiquing other people's work,
Yeah.
than you might think. But I'm going to redirect you back to the first part of Peg's question, which is, because I agree with her that it is terrifying, the thought of not even knowing who committed the murder when you start writing a book. So how do you handle that?
You know, I've done enough of it now that I'm almost beginning to trust the process. Every time it feels like stepping off the edge of a diving board and not knowing whether there's any water in the pool. You just you start writing. I just heard the most interesting description of the kind of writing I do, because they've called it plotters and pantsers, people who plot out their thing, and then others who fly by the seat of their pants. This man called it discovery writing. I thought, wow, that's exactly what it is. I'm discovering what is going on around this topic. Yeah. Like, for example, I'll tell you at the very beginning, there's a woman who has called her sister and said she's in trouble. Well, I'll tell you where this came from, and it has no connection to the book, but it has a connection to the way my mind works. And that is, I had a friend whose aunt called her mother and said, "I've run away. Please come and get me." Um, she had run away because her son and daughter-in-law had moved her and her husband into a garage apartment, and her husband was disabled, so this woman was trapped. The husband died, and she felt like she was trapped, and that her son and daughter-in-law were keeping her in this place, so she ran away. She called her sister, and her sister called the police to come and get her. So the police took her back to her situation, and a week later she was found dead in the swimming pool.
My
So
gosh.
that had been on my mind forever. So I'm thinking, here's a woman who's calling her sister to say, I mean, or sister calls her anyway. There's a conversation in which she says, I'm in trouble. I can't talk right now. Something bad's happening. And her sister's really upset. And that image was in my mind. So there's an image that comes to my mind when I first start out, an image or an idea that I'll just start putting on the page and say, you know, well, where is this going? Who is this woman? Why is someone chasing her? Why did she end up dead here? You know, what are the clues that tell me why she's lying out there in the middle of nowhere? And I mean, it's a journey of discovery. Yeah, that's what it
So
is.
how big a role does revision play then in that process, going back and once you know the full story?
The insane part to me is that of course there's revision, but a lot less than you'd think. It's amazing how much all those ideas come together and coalesce as you're writing. I set myself a really impossible goal, which I do, which is 2,000 words a day. I sit down and I write 2,000 words every single day until I'm done. So I don't have time to sort of noodle around with it. It's my head is processing what's happening at the same time I'm writing it down. Now, that hasn't always worked. In my third book, which is my cautionary tale, I ran off the rails, and at the end of the book, it was like I'd knit a sweater with 3 sleeves. I said, this isn't working. The whole book didn't work. And I had to go back and I said, where did this run off the rails? And I realized a minor character had run away with the story. That she meant nothing to the story, but I kept writing about her. She was really cute. She was a lot of fun, but it didn't have anything to do with the story. So I had to go back and rip out all her stuff, and she ended up being a paragraph. Really just a paragraph. And then the story got to be the story it is. I know this thing about Michelangelo. Was it Michelangelo saying, what you do is, yeah, you just no, there's a better.
Yeah, you take away what doesn't belong there.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
you get a block of stone and you take away whatever's not a man.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And that's sort of the way it feels to me, that I'm just, of course there are extraneous things every now and then. I have golden words, like a paragraph that's beautiful. I say, yeah, that's wonderful writing. It's wonderful. I get rid of it. It has nothing to do with the story. You have to be ruthless. But I don't do a lot of rewriting. The thing that I just turned in, this is so stupid. I can't even believe I'm going to tell anybody this, but I wrote this book in 2 months, and I didn't have any more time than that, and I'm finished. And now I'm reading the edits, and this woman said, "Oh, there's very little to do," but then she asked these questions. I think, I don't know. So I'm having to tap dance my way around the edits and say, okay, just throw that out because it means nothing. It's so, yeah, there's a process.
I think Sally wanted to say something.
No, but I do a similar thing. I'm a pantser, but I always know who the killer is, right?
I never do.
Except in one book, I started out with a very clear picture of who the murderer was, and then I thought, it's too obvious that this is I made this character so obviously the murderer, I can't have him be the murderer. And I changed it like 2/3 of the way through the book. And I thought, well, this should surprise my readers, because it certainly surprised me.
I had an editor who was a real, she was a really interesting person, and she taught me so much. But one of the things she said in every book I wrote with her, she said, "You're not done yet. You need one more chapter." And I would fight tooth and nail at the end. I'd say, "That's ridiculous. It's completely the way it is. It's exactly the way I want it." And 2 days later, I'd think, "Oh, wait a minute." And in fact, in one of the books, I wrote a chapter and I cried when I wrote it because it was so poignant, this last chapter, and it drew it together in a way that just didn't. And sometimes she'll say there's one more thing, there's one more twist you need. And I often at the last minute will say, "Oh, this was the killer, da 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 da," and then I say, "Oh, wait, no, it's not the killer. That was there's one more twist." And then I have to explain why that one wasn't it. But yeah, I
I'm
have a
gonna, I'm sorry, go ahead.
oh, I was just going to say, I have a second series that I write about an FBI diver, a woman who's on the FBI dive team. And the one I just wrote, I was struggling. I thought, how in the world am I going to find out who did this? And I said, "Oh, wait, I know who did it. And I know what happened." So I'm writing along. And the next night I'm in the bathtub and this little voice comes to me and says, "You couldn't leave well enough alone, could you?" And I went, "Oh no, that's not the killer after all." It's just, I mean, it just blossoms from there. Yeah, yeah.
I want to say, Nancy has a question, but before I get to that, I just want to say that reading this book a second time, the first time I read it, I had no idea who the killer was. None, not even a hint. The second time as I'm reading it, I'm like, what is wrong with me? Because every single clue is there. It's so obvious. So so I'm just stunned that you didn't like go in and massage, during revision. But anyway,
No idea.
Nancy asks, do you think about themes for the book before writing after ever?
I think about the kinds of social theme I want to work on. Sometimes, okay, the eighth book in the series was about senior citizens who go online and get caught up sometimes in scams. And so that was the theme, that was the whole book about what that was about. But it ended up being about more than that. So yeah, there's a thread that I might want to pursue, but the books often end up being about more than that because there are other characters in it and they have a life too. And often things are not all about just one thing. Yeah. Yeah.
She also asked the same question of Sally and me. So I'll give Sally a second to think about it while I answer and say, I have discovered that if I don't know what I'm trying to say with a book, that I have a very difficult time writing it. So this happened with a book I wrote called Angels in the Snow. And I knew who the killer was and I knew why they were killing, whatever. But I didn't understand the deeper theme of it until about halfway in when I couldn't make things work. And then I realized, okay, it's because this character has this issue. And I found out that it was about people basically that, well, spoiler alert, it's about that this person is asexual and his mother doesn't understand that. She doesn't, this was a time when, nobody even knew what the term asexual was. So he's discovering it, she's discovering it, and she really piles on this, you're defective, you're bad, you're sick, you're this, you're that, you're the other. And so it's about these themes of what can happen to a child when we either give them the support they need or don't. And once I got that theme in mind, then the book wrote itself, right? So let me hand over to Sally.
Well, my books are cozy mysteries, so they're mostly character driven, and I really don't have any social issue themes in them at all. Like they're pure escapism. But my one book that is not a part of the series was Stop the Threat, which was about school shootings. And so there was a very serious theme there. And I worked very hard to present all points of view. But what I was I attended a Citizens Police Academy, and the last class was about the active shooter, and the school resource officer presented. And of course, the question came up with, well, why don't we just arm the teachers? And I had been a classroom teacher, so I cringe whenever anybody says that. And I thought, does anybody have any idea what might really happen if we armed teachers? Really, what would happen? And that's the book I wrote. I just wanted to show, like, did you have any idea, like, where could this go wrong? You know?
I think that's brilliant. I think that's brilliant to take something that you are really, that you know something about,
Yeah.
that someone says in ignorance, and that you want to explore that. Yeah.
So that's the only book I have that has a theme. And I'm not anti-gun. And I show, that's what I wanted to show, but I wanted to show people that arming the teachers, that was the thing that, like, to me, just was not an option.
You know, I have in my books a man who is a gun nut. He thinks everybody ought to have a gun. Anything that happens, he says, is his line is, well, if he had had a gun. And Samuel gets tired of it, but then Samuel gets to know this guy, and he finds out that the guy has a disabled son that he is incredibly kind to, because I wanted to show him not as just a gun nut, but as a person who had a real life as well. So yeah, so I think that's the thing, is that we get these themes, but they don't dovetail. You know, they're not narrow. You
Yeah.
know, they have to be wider than that. Yeah.
I think this is what is interesting to me, especially about your book, is that it's very easy to paint things in black and white, but there's all kinds of shades of gray. And we have to, if we want to be empathetic humans that live in an empathetic society, we have to be able to look at that. But we're coming up on the end of the hour. So I want to say, I would like to know what's next for Samuel Craddock and what's next in your book writing.
Well, Samuel Craddock, okay, the next Jesse Madison book comes out in July, and that is going to be enormous fun. There's a shark in it. And the next Samuel Craddock, I'm just now doing the edits for, and it will come out in December. And it is about corrupt people in positions of power. Gee, where would that come from?
Never happened, Terry. Never. It's not plausible. All right. Well, I will wrap up by saying thank you so much, Terry, for taking your
Oh,
time.
thank you for
For those
inviting
of
me.
you who
It's
don't know,
great.
Terry was just traveling, so she's still like jet lagged, and she came to do this for us. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
And next time we are going to read She Left by Stacey Gray. And I'm trying to convince her to come and give us a little visit. So hopefully that will happen. And thank you guys all for joining us today and having such an interesting discussion. And I will send it back to Sally.
Okay, well, I have said all that I have to say for the day. And I thank you all for joining us. And I am going to end our recording. Let's see if I can stop that. Yes.